This is A Geek Leader. Hello, and welcome to episode 179 of Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and this episode is brought to you by Private Internet Access. Now, if you don't use private internet access when you're surfing the web, let's say you're traveling or something like that, or you're out of your house, then you're probably not surfing the web securely. I've been using private internet access for over 3 years, and I love the service. I was at a security conference several years ago, back before COVID, and I connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, and immediately my endpoint protection started pinging me that I was having hacking attempts. Someone was trying to connect to, was scanning my ports and all this good stuff. So I launched private internet access, and once I did that, the threats just stopped. One of the cool things about private internet access is you can choose VPNs from different locations. So you can test whenever you make changes to see whether DNS is replicated. You can test what it looks like from different sites. You can test latency from different locations all around the world, all around the United States, and in many, many, many other countries. It's a very cool tool, and you can get your copy of, or your license or your account for private internet access for $3.33 a month. That's right, $3.33 a month by going to ageekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's ageekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I've got Dr. Steve Yacovelli, and he's also known as the Gay Leadership Dude, which I think is a kind of interesting title. We'll talk about where that nickname came from maybe later. But you're the owner of TopDog Learning Group, which is a global leadership, consulting, change management, and diversity and inclusion group. And when I first heard about you, I thought this will be a very interesting conversation to have because, for me being a straight white dude, it's a little bit uncomfortable, but I want to be, stretched, right? I need to be stretched. I need to have these uncomfortable conversations every now and then to, to open my eyes, to enlighten me, to make me a better person, to grow. But with all that being said, welcome to the show. And if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are today, how you got into this leadership stuff, and what the past has been like for you.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to kind of share some stuff with y'all. So I started kind of in my career actually as a software trainer, so kind of was in the tech world. Yeah. And as I shared with you before, to date myself, it was the days of DOS, quite frankly. So it's a little bit of a time, but that's how I started playing around with humans and guiding them and communicating with them. Flash forward, I made my way through organizations internally like the Walt Disney Company. I worked at IBM for a while as a change management consultant. I was a professor for like a hot minute. Academia was not my jam. But I eventually made my way to start my own company, TopDog Learning Group. We started part-time, but I took it full-time in 2008, which was a stellar time to start a business, if you remember the economy then. Yeah. But I made it work. And 12 years later, TopDog works with both big and small organizations, Fortune 500s, small mom and pop shops, or pop and pop or mom and mom, as well as a lot of non-for-profits. But really our main focus is helping people be more effective in their leadership awesomeness, whatever that can be.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to leadership, you've got a book out, which I was able to check out, which, thank you for that, by the way. And you talk about 6 leadership competencies. And I want to get into why those 6 kind of showed up on your radar as being the 6 that you wanted to hit on. And also, I think your book's called Pride Leadership, right?
Correct. Pride Leadership Strategies for the LGBTQ Plus leader to be the king or queen of their jungle. And I'll talk about how my awesome allies will still enjoy it, and a really cool story there. But to answer your question, I'm holding up literally my mouse pad because I printed this out. But what I did was, I've been in this space for 25 plus years. And over that time, I worked with a lot of leaders. And you start seeing a pattern on what is somebody rocking and rolling and doing a great job in leadership, and the ones that are crashing and failing, and you see where there's some of the gaps in their competencies. And so, I'm kind of tucking this way, like nerd that I am. And so about 2 years ago, I'm at a conference and I'm outside a session and I'm sorting my business cards, and there's a woman next to me doing the same thing. And she's like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, leadership, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "How about you?" She's like, "I'm a publisher." I'm like, "You know what? There's a leadership book in my head that needs to come out." She's like, "Let's talk." And, Jen of Publisher Purpose Press is my publisher now. She's awesome. So as I was formulating the book, And I actually used a friend of mine who's also kind of in the diversity and organizational development space. I brought him with some wine, and we sat in my office and just wrote on Post-it notes, like, what are the competencies that we see work out in the world? And also did some research with some of the great books that are already on the shelves, like by Brene Brown and some other great ones. And I had about 40 Post-it notes in my office, and I started kind of organizing them, and it really filtered into these 6 competencies that I've seen. Leaders who have these, they're rocking and rolling. And for those who aren't visually or just listening, it's authenticity, courage, empathy, communications, relationships, and culture, or shaping culture. And so those are kind of the ones that I focused on. And then I decided to put it through an LGBTQ+ lens, because I argue in the book that if I am a member of that group, you might have a unique opportunity to exercise these differently than some of our straight brothers and sisters. So, for example, authenticity. Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm an out gay dude at work, or I'm a trans person being my authentic self in the workplace, you can't be more authentic than that. And you can channel that awesome strength into effective leadership. And that's kind of the conversation I have in my book. Now, it's not just for career people, quite frankly. When my editor read the first draft, which was just nerve-wracking because she was the only other person in the universe to read it, she's like, okay, Steve, sit down. I'm like, oh, crap. And she's like, I'm a white cisgendered straight woman, and this is the book I wanted during my MBA program. I'm like, what? Yeah. And she goes, it's funny, it's cheeky, it's absolutely not academically written, but it's well cited. But you're talking about things that I can completely relate with. And that's what I really loved about the book. It speaks to an audience, but it really is broad for every audience.
Yeah, I think one of the things I like about it, it's almost like you're having a conversation. The book is not just, it's not like a textbook. It's very much like you're having a conversation. Even the first chapter, you're like, hey, did you read the preface? Go back and read it. I'll give you time. It's definitely like you're having a conversation with someone. And even if you had nothing about being gay in the title or in the book at all, it would still be a best-selling leadership book, in my opinion.
Thanks.
So I think that's just it's a piece of it that kind of adds something to it to make you think a little bit more. For being a white guy,
yep.
Straight white guy, it makes me think more about, okay, what am I doing or what am I not doing that I should be doing? And going through that path. So let me ask you this: getting off the leadership, or maybe it's still part of leadership, but moving away a little bit in the diversity and inclusion piece of it. What is something that maybe I should be thinking about that I'm not thinking about today, as somebody in tech that's a leader?
You're a rock star for asking that, first of all, John, and audience, just so you know, that wasn't pre-planned. So this is a fantastic segue. One of the things that I'm really, really, really focusing on with a lot of my clients now, more than ever, but pre Black Lives Matter and things happening during COVID, is the concept of unconscious bias. And that's been out there for a while. I actually first started teaching it when I was at Disney, but I don't like that phrase. I think unconscious bias is horribly done. So, for example, when I was teaching a session while at Disney, it was like the first time, I'm all excited to do it. And there's this guy in the back of the room, and he's just sitting there, hands folded. He was so not into anything that I had to say. And finally I said to him, I'm like, Bob, we'll just make him Bob. Bob, do you have something to share? He's like, if it's unconscious bias, I can't do anything about it. The end. And I'm like, whoa. And it really, though, got me thinking that when you say unconscious bias, people are just like, unconscious, I'm done. And so I actually refer to it as being consciously inclusive. And now when I work with leaders, I challenge them, how are you being consciously inclusive? So yes, it does start with understanding your own unconscious biases. And there's awesome free tools like Project Implicit. If you Google Project Implicit, you'll find some really cool online free assessments you can do that may indicate some of your unconscious biases. But I think, to answer your question, that's where a smart leader should start, is what are the biases I have? Because quite frankly, anyone who's listening, if you're breathing, y'all have bias. So it's just how it is. We're humans. That's how we're programmed. But you can de-bias yourself. And that's the really brilliant, cool part. So a smart leader will start to understand, what biases do I have, and really actively work or consciously work to de-bias themselves or manage their behavior or speech so that they're not perpetuating those biases and gross generalizations that might be out there.
Yeah. And I'll give an example, kind of throw myself under the bus a little bit here, but, and I've talked about this once before. I was at a conference and I was talking about my team. And at the time on my team, I think I was probably 40% female.
But I said guys, the guys on my team, and we were just talking, and I was just having, just talking, giving a talk. And I kept saying, yeah, the guys on my team, the guys on my team. And then this one person afterwards came up to me. She's like, it's so offensive that you just talk about the guys on your team. What about the girls on your team? I was like, I didn't even know guys was a gender term. Like I never even, it totally did not even cross my mind that I was talking about gender. I was just talking about people,
Well, and it's a great point. I mean, I'm from the Philly area originally, so you use guys there you go. Yeah, go Eagles. Fly, Eagles, fly. But that's how I grew up. Use guys. And when I moved to I live in Orlando now, and when I moved here 20 plus years ago, somehow I picked up y'all. And I think that's a gender neutral advantage to us Southerners now. We can leverage that. So leverage that as best you can. And if you can't, yins is okay. I did live in Ohio, so you can say yins. That's cool too.
Yeah, I tried my best to get out of y'all so people didn't know I was from South Carolina, but so I started saying you guys, and now it's like, oh, now I can't say that either. So,
but John, to bring it back to technology, that's a fantastic point. So we talk about blacklisting and whitelisting. Those are unconscious terms that really aren't so cool, because the whitelist is the good one, the blacklist is the bad one. What does that send with that message? And so when I talk about being consciously inclusive, it's thinking about things like that through a different lens, so that we foster a sense of belonging for everybody on our team.
Yeah, and I think sometimes in my opinion, one of your items was relationships and communication. That's two of them, right? Mm-hmm. And a big part of being a good leader when it comes to dealing with times like this, where we've got people that are upset, with who knows what all is going on right now. I don't even know. There's fire somewhere. There's, a virus somewhere. There's race problems everywhere. And what are we going to do about it? Well, as a leader, we need to build those relationships to where we can have open communication, and where you can ask those questions and say, hey, am I making you uncomfortable? And I'll give an example. I have a friend of mine, and she always invites her entire team whenever there's a birthday event. She sends everybody, hey, we're going to be celebrating somebody's birthday. We're doing a Zoom, lunch or whatever. And one person on her team always declined, never showed up. And so she asked them, it's like, well, why don't you come? She's like, well, it's against my religion to celebrate birthdays. Okay, well, and then she's like, okay, that's cool. I get it. But she continued to invite her. And then she's like, well, do you even want me to invite you? She's like, no, I don't. It bothers me every time you invite me, because I feel like I'm being, outcast even more. I would rather just not even know about it. And she's like, well, I wanted to include you by inviting you. And, I didn't want to, just ignore you, during this time. And she's like, well, so it's one of those things where you have to have that conversation to know if what you're doing is right, because you may have the best intentions in the world, but you're offending someone.
And so often than not, John, that's exactly what happens when leaders stumble. It's they're coming from the heart and they're trying to do the best thing, but it's not just being open to maybe some of those differences that are out there. But kudos to that leader for asking their person, why are you declining? And then once that person said, because of this reason, religious reasons, then the best scenario would have been she just removed that person and said, okay, great, then I'm going to remove you. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we as leaders can do is to ask a lot of great open-ended questions, but also to listen. And there's an often quoted Stephen Covey quote. Stephen Covey, big leadership guru. We often listen to respond versus listen to understand, and that's so critical for good leadership. Is we want to have our eyes and ears open to listen to understand versus to listen to that response. Because we in Western society, especially in the U.S., we tend to just people come at us with a question and we just want to solve their solution. We just give them an answer. Would you talk to HR about that? That's not a lot of times what people want to do. They want you to know that they've been heard and you're hearing them truly for the meaning, not just the words that they're saying.
Yeah. I think I know for me, listening, probably my first couple of years of management, listening was probably my hardest, one of my hardest things. And I still struggle with empathy. I'll be honest with you. It's hard for me to put myself in someone else's shoes because I haven't been there, and it's hard for me to say, I don't know what you feel like, because I always want to know everything, right? I want to be, the leader that knows everything. Right, so right. It is difficult. And I still struggle with that, and I have to be very intentional, which I think that goes back to your point of being conscious about your unbiasedness. So I think I'm trying to be intentional about some of those things.
Yeah.
So let me flip this on you. I mentioned some of the potential, unconscious biases that I may have being a Southern white tech leader,
Yep.
male, straight. What are some things that you may have that I need to be aware of or I need to talk about?
I have, as in regard to unconscious biases.
Yeah. So what are some things that not being in tech, being a leadership person, you come in, you're going to talk to a tech people, tech folks, and we all have our stereotypes, and,
Sure.
And some are true, some are not, right? And that's just life, and not everybody fits into any. There's not a single person that fits into every stereotype, and that's totally wrong to even think about it. But being a tech geek, I look at my audience and I try to generalize them as being people like me, and I know they're not.
Right.
But
sure.
What are some pitfalls that I may fall into, or that you may fall into, coming to speak to a group like mine?
Well, and I think you're right. We all have those unconscious biases, and I work with a lot of different professions, different organizations. One of my big clients is the Public Library Association, and also the American Library Association. And I remember my first gig with them. This woman who was like a professional library consultant. We were basically doing like a 2.5-day roving workshop around the country to teach librarians how to be business people. Like public speaking, appearance, how you put together a strategic plan, like those kinds of things. So we were all business people who had no right to be in the library world. And this library consultant, who was kind of like our mother hen, like our coach and all that good stuff, she's like, okay, picture a typical librarian in your head right now. She's like, honestly, that's about 70%. So there's some validity to it. However, don't overanalyze. And I'm like, that's a really nice way to put it. And so I always kind of think about that when, stereotypes happen, sadly, for a reason, because there's a trend. But you never want to say an absolute is always this. So for the tech folks, I wouldn't think that y'all are single, straight, white men who are introverted, who never kind of go out. Like there's that the perpetual stereotype.
You hit about 70% of me.
but so I, as somebody coming into that culture, should be sensitive to that, because that's kind of there for a reason, but absolutely never play into the stereotype. And so I would go in and think about, where are my women? Where are my people of color? Where are my LGBTQ folks? Where are the folks who, are really extroverted and love to stand up and do public speaking and all that fun stuff? Because those are also part of your tribe, your group. And so as an external person, being mindful that, there's trends for a reason, but absolutely never play into them. I'll use another example. I do a lot of work with 3 of my biggest clients are German multinational companies, but all headquartered in Germany. I don't know how that happened. They're not related, but hey, there you go. So I do know that because of the German, HQ, there is a cultural influence into their U.S. operations from the German national. For example, Germans tend to be, notice how I said tend to be extremely timely. Like more so than a lot of other cultures and even organizations. So I know here in the States, when I'm having a meeting with that client, if the meeting starts at noon, I'm there 5 minutes before, even if it's virtual, because they will be insanely timely. And so you use that to your advantage as a leader, that there might be trends you can start to understand, but never, ever, 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 one more time, ever think that that's how the entire group is, because you're going to burn yourself. And ultimately, you're going to create distrust with the members of all of the group if you just start assuming things about the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, going back to, I like the order that you put your 6 things in, like with authenticity as being like the first, because I think being authentic is really important as a leader, but also just as a person in general. You want to be yourself. If you're, like if I came into this conversation and was totally non-authentic and talked about, something that's not technical, not IT related, then I'm probably going to step on my toes. I'm going to misspeak. I'm going to be completely confused and sound like an idiot, and people are going to see right through it. But also, I'm going to do myself a disservice, because I'm not going to learn about myself. I'm not going to learn how to grow. I'm not going to. You talked about the drone, being able to see yourself from above, and the drone analogy of, like, let's say what if you could lift up and look down and see what you're doing right now? And that's a hard thing to do.
Oh yeah.
Self-awareness is extremely difficult. And I know for me, having this podcast where I can go back and listen to myself, it's brutal. But being able to do that, I can say, oh man, I misspoke again, or I said that thing again that I'm trying to, correct myself and be better about. But it helps you in the long run to go through those things. What are some other things that maybe leaders can do to become more self-aware, to see how they're treating their people, or how they're actually, talking to people?
It's a great question. And so one of the things that, to your exact point, John, having that self-awareness is hard. And that's why I talk about it in Pride Leadership. Mindfulness is a great way to kind of start to get out of your own head. And if you're not familiar with that listening, mindful meditation is a great way to start to understand why you say things that you say, why you do things the way you do them, and really think about it from that way. So Google mindfulness and you'll find lots of great stuff. It's not just for yogis and granola crunchy awesome folks anymore. And I practice yoga, so I can say that. But it's in the C-suite now. Executives are going and understanding mindfulness. They're getting apps like Headspace and some of the other ones out there to really dive deeper in. So that's one way. Another way too is to find that trusted person within your workspace and have them be your eyes and ears too, and be open to their feedback. So, in my book, I talk about your work wife or work husband, your work bestie, whatever phrase you like to do. We tend to have that at least one confidant within your workplace. And so if you can kind of pull them aside and say, look, I'm trying to develop my leadership awesomeness. I'm trying to work on this thing. Can you kind of watch it for me and provide me for that feedback? I give you that permission to call me out on things and really help me be better and see things that maybe I'm not seeing in those blind spots.
I think that's a really good point, to have that confidant. And I had a Navy SEAL on a while back, and he said that's your master chief, right? It's going to be the person that has more experience than you, and isn't afraid to tell you how it is, and have that person. And I think when you talk about your bestie at work being that person, they're going to be the ones that will tell you, because they know it's not going to affect your friendship, negatively. Anyway.
Exactly. And again, I phrased it very specifically, like, hey, I'm trying to be better. And that's on purpose. So you're saying I'm coming from the heart, from where I want to improve myself, be a better leader, be more successful, make my team more successful. And so when people approach you like that, they're so much more open to help you. And be like, instead of like, oh, I'm doing this so I can get a raise. Yeah, it's a bit self-serving. So if you're doing it from a true place of authenticity, there's that word again, people are going to go out of their way to help you grow and develop. And that's just a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, coming at it that way, people will understand then that, and maybe it's something that I open up a lot of my conversations with, I'm trying to understand.
Yep.
So if I ask something that's offensive, it's because I'm trying to understand, and I want you to understand that I'm coming from that place. I'm not trying to, be mean. I'm not trying to belittle you. I'm not trying to, do anything negative. I just don't know. And
sure. One piece of advice I would do, and I talk about this in the book as well, but when we as humans can lop onto certain phrases for various reasons. I know I talk about a story in the book where because I learned this in my counseling, psych masters, all that fun stuff. So what I hear you saying is, so I say that once, that's fine. But when you Pavlovianly condition people to do that, sometimes it can be like overwhelming. You can listen to it on the news now. I'm not getting political, but you can hear politicians when they're really trying to drive home their point. They always go, look. And then their big point is there. And so whenever you hear the word look, and now I'm also hearing news reporters say it, look, here's the deal, and so it's like, oh, that's the big one. So, but that's that Pavlovian conditioning we're doing. So if you can mix it up just a little bit to be like, well, help me understand. Or so from that perspective, what I'm hearing is, and I actually have a bunch of phrases in the book I talk about where you can use these to really paraphrase to make sure that in the communication chapter, you're getting the message correctly and you're hearing what they're really saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big part of that, though, is also having that relationship. What are some things we can do? Let's say we're a new manager, because a lot of our audience, are new to leadership, they're new to management, and they need to be able to build that relationship. But sometimes, you don't want to be necessarily best friends with the people that report to you, because you've got to sometimes have some hard steps. What are some things we can do to build those good relationships so that we have the ability to communicate properly with people? We can understand them and be effective as a leader. Yeah.
So I had a gentleman ask me a while ago. He's like, what's the secret to leadership? I said, you know what? I can tell you. Seriously, here it is. My book is 356 pages. So I could literally have written the secret of leadership on one page with one word. And that's, you want to know what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. It's trust. It's trust. I mean, yeah. And that's not really a secret, but everything I talk about in Pride Leadership, everything I talk about in any leadership capacity, Your job as an effective leader is to foster trust within your teams. And remember, team doesn't have to be direct reports. It could be your peers. It could be your bosses. It's really everyone. I define leader as everybody, really. You don't have to have that solid line reporting structure to be a leader. So one of the strategies in order to build those relationships, to build that trust, is to first set expectations. Hey, team member, this is the goal I have for our team, work with integrity, like all the things that you should say. Sometimes you can use your corporate values if you have those. Maybe those corporate values really aren't in line with what's really done in the business. That's a whole other story about authenticity. Yeah. But you set that expectation up front. And even if you have an existing team and you're like, oh, rats, Steve, I haven't done that yet. No worries. You go and say, hey, team, here's the deal. I'm trying to be a better leader. One of the things that I'm learning is I need to set those expectations. I don't think I've done a good job about that, but here it is now. Great. Now you have your kind of baseline. So then the next step is to make sure that you're fostering a culture of feedback. And so I don't really talk about this a whole lot in the book, but one of the things I teach in my leadership workshops is there's a bunch of methods and models about effective leadership. They all have kind of similar threads. The one I prefer is called the EECC method. So it's the E is example. So you say, hey, John, when you were on that Zoom meeting leading our department or interdepartmental meeting, so as a specific example, then you go to the next E, which is effect. You didn't we didn't get all the data that we needed in order to move forward with our project. So that's what happened during that meeting. So then it's the C's are either, even though it's E squared, C squared, it's only one C used at a time. So it's either change or continue depending on the situation. So in this case, you screwed up. I'm telling you, John, you screwed up. So in the future, this is the change part, the C, I'd encourage you to maybe get an agenda, send it out in time and stick to it as best as you can so that we knew we can kind of get the stuff forward. You're like, okay, cool. So what I just did was I told you very specifically feedback. I told you my recommendations for maybe correcting it. There, now I kind of empower you to go do it. And you do that also within a timely manner. Now, if it's also the good stuff, hey, John, when you ran that Zoom interdepartmental meeting for us the other day, you did a great job meeting all the agenda items. Matter of fact, we ended 10 minutes early and everyone loves the gift of time to not be on Zoom. So, hey, this is the continue part, the last C. Keep up the great work. I really, really appreciate your efforts on that one. So again, what I'm doing is reinforcing that communication. And you notice that feedback isn't like a dirty word. It should be a really neutral, if not positive word. And so a great leader will foster effective feedback within their teams using a model like the EECC or whatever model kind of works best for you.
How often should a leader give feedback? Because if I did it after every meeting that I was in with someone, it'd probably be a little too much, right? How often should I actually give the feedback?
Yeah, that's a great question, but there is no great answer because it really does depend. But I think for leaders, some people are really good about just providing that feedback when they need to. And I'm just recommending framing it through something that's more actionable versus, hey, you do a great job, John. That's nice, but what can you do with that? You don't really know exactly what that means. So if you're a leader who isn't so keen on giving frequent feedback, both positive and not so positive or negative, or however you like to phrase it, put something in your Outlook to remind you, have you given feedback this week? And another thing that I tend to recommend leaders do is after you give that feedback, always, as best you can, give it verbal, even in the age of Zoom. This is still verbal and live and in person. Follow it up with an email real quick. Just like, hey, John, just as a reminder, you did a great job on that meeting. I so appreciated that. And then what I used to do when I led, especially larger teams, I had my Outlook or my email folder for each team member, and I just throw that in there. So when it came review time, I had data I could go to versus oh, John, what did he do again? Oh, well, last week he did a good job. That means he's a good job all year. It's not how it works. So a way for you as a good leader to kind of keep track of that, I think is probably the smart way to do it. But there is no, every 2 days I should be leading or talking with my team. It just doesn't happen. But you'll know, and as you start to look at it over time, and maybe, hey, I'm a data geek, so I love it. Maybe it's an Excel spreadsheet that when I add feedback, so that I can kind of get that bigger picture to be like, whoa, I'm not giving John feedback, but I'm giving Juanita, or also on my team, a whole lot of feedback. And so just kind of helping yourself see that drone perspective when it comes to feedback.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about documenting it and keeping that data, because sometimes you'll realize that you haven't given someone feedback because they haven't done anything, and it's sometimes it's hard to give feedback when you haven't seen their it's not that they haven't really done anything. They just haven't showed you, shown you what they've done. And, or maybe they didn't do anything. You never know.
But yeah. And I would just add like a final point, John, is now more than ever, people need that feedback, because we're not sitting cubicle to cubicle. We're not in the same room or the same space. And so a smart leader is really going above and beyond and reaching out to team members who are remote and be like, how are things? How are you doing? What can I do to support you in these weird and wonderful times? That, again, fosters trust and relationship. And that's what we want to do when we get on the other side of this COVID, is have that established.
Mm-hmm. So how has COVID maybe affected, a leader's ability to manage, or what are some things that we need to do to adapt because of the COVID era?
So that's another great question. So what I've seen leaders who are thriving at this kind of time, and thriving can be a very subjective term, but they're able to leverage the technology as best they can to still mimic what would have been the face-to-face experience. Mm-hmm. So smart leaders are doing things like I just said, reaching out to their team members. They're figuring out ways to not just get work done, but also get relationships built through the medium, whether that be virtual coffee time, virtual happy hours, people leveraging some of the plug-in tools out there to do like gaming and stuff, just kind of have some team building and fun. I know one of the leaders I was working with the other day, he actually did a virtual escape room. I'm like, how does that work?
Yeah.
And he's like, basically, the escape room employees had iPads and were walking around and I'm like, that's fantastic. He's like, I was just trying to foster team because especially now people need a break and they're Zoom fatigued and there's a lot of ambiguity. And I teach change management as well. And, people have a saturation point for change. And my goodness, we're hitting it for most of us. Even if you're tech savvy, change savvy, you're still that. So smart leaders are really thinking ways to engage their folks and really keeping a temperature check on, you talk about empathy, how people are feeling, their emotional state, to kind of get them through till we get on the other side of this.
Yeah, I know. One of the things that you mentioned, the virtual escape room, I've actually done one of those, which is really cool. There's a company out of the UK that puts them together, and they're actually really well done, where you can log in from different places and you watch a video. There's like scenarios you can scroll through, like the case files or whatever, and you try to come up with a number, and then you work together to put in the number. And if you get it right, you go to the next slide or whatever. They're pretty good. But I have a friend of mine, and she's a manager of a project management team. And they used to always have like Friday lunches. Every Friday, the team went to lunch together. And then COVID happened. So they started to do, virtual Zoom lunches. And now they've kind of added to it, say, they want to see who has the most elaborate lunch or the most fantastic lunch that they create. Exactly. So, they have like a little contest that goes on about, oh, I've got a chicken sandwich. Oh yeah, well, look what I've got.
I got a gourmet meal here. Yeah. We also do one-on-one coaching. So one of my coachees, I asked kind of a very similar question to her. And I said, how are you keeping your team fresh? She's like, well, I came up with a cool idea where during our Friday team meetings, we have a theme, a dress-up theme. And it's optional. People don't have to. She's like, and we said you can even do like virtual, because depending on the tool you're using, you can put up your little stuff. She's like, people got way into it, and she's like, it's simple. Sometimes it's just a hat, like what's your Patriot theme was near like the 4th of July, and sometimes it's just wacky, like dress as the culture where you wish you could vacation right now. And so she's like, it's really cool, and just little things like that can really, really, really go a long way for leaders to keep their folks engaged.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And it's one of those things that it's not hard to do. It's just, spend the 5 minutes, come up with it and do it,
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that, comes up with me that hinders me from doing some of these things is fear. You're afraid of how it's going to come off. What are some things that as leaders we can do to kind of help us battle the fear of opening up, of being vulnerable, of trying something like this?
That's a great question. That's actually the chapter on courage. So I thought, I think it's 4 or 5, chapter 5. Okay. I didn't think about it. I've only been living with this thing for like 2 years. So courage is a big one, and putting yourself out there as a leader can really be a challenge. But the concept of courage doesn't have to be limited to the workplace. So one of the things I recommend, and I wish I knew who said this quote, book because it's so awesome and it's such great advice. Be brave enough to suck at something new. And it's true. It's like for me going out and let's say I'm going to try unicycling. Okay. I'm almost 50. That's probably not a good idea. But anyway, but try something new and know that you're going to be horrible at it. So what can you learn from that from a leadership perspective? Well, that feeling of uncomfort, that feeling of awkwardness when you're trying something out, that's fantastic. And managing that. And I always say that, you're never going to get rid of butterflies when you're scared or nervous or upset, but you can learn how to make them fly in formation. So putting yourself out there and acknowledging that, wow, this is going to feel icky and weird, but you know what? That's okay. That's a great way to foster courage that you can then channel into the workplace culture.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think, like you said, you're never going to get rid of the butterflies, but if you can, learn to be comfortable with them, somebody told me that I need to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, he was my old mentor when I first became a manager, and he was telling me, what you need to do is try to be, and at the time I was trying to work on negotiation because I'd just taken over like all these contracts and I needed to renegotiate. I'm like, I don't want asking for a discount, He's like, well, what you need to do is go to the coffee shop, order coffee. And then when they give it to you and they tell you like it's $2.75, say, how about I give you $2.50? And just negotiate that quarter. He's like, it's going to feel awful. It's going to feel super uncomfortable. But as you get comfortable doing that, you're going to be more comfortable when you ask someone for $10,000 less on your invoice,
Yeah. No, that's fantastic advice. I'm sure that the Starbucks people were like, no.
99% of the time. Yeah.
But that's not the point. That's not the point. That's not the point. Yeah.
And then you say, okay, awesome. I'll give you $3.
Right. Nice.
So, do you have any closing pieces of advice or anything like that you can give new leaders that are out there that are trying to figure out how to be the best leader that they can be and the most inclusive, the most, all those buzzwords?
Yeah. I think that the best piece of advice that I received when I was kind of a shiny new leader out of the wrapper kind of thing was find that mentor that you trust and you can have those very frank conversations with. And I talk about this kind of toward the end of the book about, there's a difference between finding a coach versus finding a mentor versus finding a counselor versus a therapist. They're all kind of similar, but there's a little bit difference, or there should be a difference in nuance. So when you find a mentor will tell you what to do. You also want to find a coach, which a coach is that person that you can kind of bounce ideas off of, and they'll just be there to ask questions to allow you to figure out the solution. And while a mentor is great, and we often use that term quite a bit, a mentor just tells you, typically, you want to find also a coach that's going to help you grow. Why do I say that? Because that's, it's kind of the difference between giving you a fish or teaching you how to fish. Yeah. That's what I see the difference between a coach and a mentor. A mentor is giving you the fish. Here you go. You should do this. Where a coach is saying, how would you cast that? Or how would you ask that question? And just kind of stepping back and letting you do your thing. Both roles are great, especially as you're kind of building your leadership awesomeness, but understand the difference between the two and make sure both are in your world. It might be the same person, quite frankly, but they might just be taking a mentor and a coaching role depending on the conversation, and that's totally fine. But be mindful of those two differences, and if you don't have them in your world, find them.
Yeah. How can people find out more about you, the things that you're doing, and how can they pick up your book?
Yeah, so the best place to go is topdoglearning.biz, B-I-Z. Mm-hmm. There you'll find all about me, about my team. There's a banner at the top where you can actually get Pride Leadership for free. You just pay for shipping and handling. So you'll see that. I'll take you to another little order form site. Then we also have the audiobook, which if I can tell you a quick story, John, about the audiobook, that was actually one of my first COVID success stories. So it was always on the books, no pun intended, to do it early this year. So my publisher said, the good rule of thumb is to have it by the first anniversary of the book, which of course was this past June. So like, cool, score. So I started working with an audio editor. Well, it was right when all the lockdowns happened. So the internet went psh. And I didn't know this, even though my doctorate's in instructional technology, but audio files are really hypersensitive and I didn't know that. So we started kind of doing the recordings. It kept dropping sound just a little bit here and there, but not good audiobook quality. And we knew that Audible would say like, no, this is crap. So the guy's like, well, you have one of two choices. You can either go get a studio in Orlando, which will cost about $10,000 a day. I'm like, no. And he's like, okay, you can record on your own. I had the microphone. I've done voiceover work in the past. He's like, just find a quiet place to do it. So I did my audiobook, 65 plus hours to actually record it. That's not how long the book is. But the funny part is I had to do it in my closet because that was the quietest place. So my gay leadership book was actually done in the closet.
That's hilarious.
Bad. But that's also available out there. It's the point of the story of that. So if you don't want to read, you can hear me doing all the cheeky dad jokes and all the kind of the fun stuff. And to your point, and thank you for that, John, it is meant to be very conversational. I didn't want it to be academic writing. I've done that in the past. This is technically my third book. But I wanted it to be fun and engaging because that's how people remember stuff. So hopefully it is, whether you consume it visually or auditorily.
Yeah, I think the audio version is awesome, and I highly recommend people checking that out. And I'll link that up in the show notes at geekleader.com. Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. This was great. Take care.
Hope you guys enjoyed the interview, and don't forget about private internet access. You can get your VPN started today for $3.33 a month. Just visit geekleader.com/VPN. Also, if you enjoyed the show, please leave a rating review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your shows. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you are listening on the Overcast player, click the little hearts and the stars. I'd greatly appreciate it. It helps us grow and get more listeners every day. Again, thanks so much, and have a great week.